Village is a group of people who started meeting as a book group, and then it expanded. And the purpose is to talk about ways to allow and enhance people to stay in their homes as long as they can, regardless of age. And in Anderson Valley, of course, that's difficult because we have so few services for anybody who's an oldster. We came up with different topics we wanted to discuss, and one of them was fire safety. And believe it or not, we're such far-thinking people. We had this thought in April and May, and of course now fire is flaming in our faces, and it's a hot and timely topic. We invited Andres Avila, who's the fire chief, to come, but today's his mom's 70th birthday, so he sends his love and regard and says, "Forget you guys." He said, "Another time maybe." But he sent along his best cohort, our retired fire chief. If you don't know him, this is Colin Wilson. Yay! And we asked Colin to come specifically to talk about fire safety and defensible space around your house, your barn, on your property, because it's so crucial these days, especially given how dry we are, and seeing that the drought of California doesn't seem to be really going away. We need to all be very conscious of it. So, without any further ado, after this, there'll be time for question and answers, and please don't leave, because we just would like to do a quick, just show of hands survey about some interest, some stuff. We want to know what you're thinking and feeling, and thanks for coming. Oh, take it away, Colin.
You don't have to tell me twice to talk. I know most of you guys, or some of you that I don't. You already kind of got my background. Like most people that are involved in emergency response and fire suppression, particularly, everybody wants to be in the fire truck and have the sirens going and be the hero and put the fire out. Well, I had a few experiences in my career on major fires. Cedar Fire, Open Hills Fire, a few others. And what I realized there are not enough fire trucks in the world to take care of everybody's house in major events, which are becoming more and more commonplace every year. We're seeing them, and it appears to be related to climate change, and the expectation is that it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. So the likelihood that we're going to have a major fire here in Anderson Valley is, probably pretty good. It may or may not come to your property. But if it does, what's going to save your house is what you do years, months, and days before the fire department gets there, probably not what the fire department does. We can do a lot. We're very fortunate to have the air attack base here with good air resources. And big, fast-moving fires, they really make the difference. Several people thank me for doing this, and I'm thanking you for letting me do it. That passion that I developed for doing prevention work like this, I still have it, even though I'm too old and too fat to be a person that goes out and actually puts the fires out now. But I really do enjoy doing this, and if any of you are members of other groups, or homeowners associations, any group of 8 or 10 people or more, I'd love to come and do a presentation for you. I was told today I got about a half an hour, and I can't anywhere near cover the material that I have in a half an hour. So one of the first things that I like to do is find out what the audience is interested in, one, and two, to encourage us. These things always work better if it's a conversation. I can sit up here and lecture and I'll lose half the people in the room. But if you have comments that you want to make or questions that you want to ask, feel free to interrupt, and we can diverge at any time. So just to kind of get a feel there, how many of you guys are here as a function of this group that your principal interest in being here is in helping other people age in Anderson Valley, and information you might put that in? Okay. And how many of you, your primary interest is in what you can learn about yourselves and your own property and what you might do in the event of a major fire? Okay. That helps direct things a little bit. Okay. Okay, Andres asked me to cover a couple of things, and so I want to do that first. The department has done a really extraordinary disaster plan, and part of that disaster plan, if you go to Anderson Valley Fire Department, to their webpage, and then scroll down on it, to this point, it says click here to sign up for Mendocino County's emergency alert system. We're going to click there. There is reverse 911. How many of you guys have heard of reverse 911? How many of you think that you're going to get a call from them in a time of need? The system has not worked very well. I think it's working a little better now than it used to be, but Andres and I made a trip to the dispatch center where they were touting reverse 911. It was going to save the day. They could do this, they could do that, they could do the other thing. So Andres and I actually went in the dispatch center and asked the people that were on duty to demonstrate a few things. They couldn't utilize the program at all. That was when it was brand new. That's many years ago now, and I'm sure they are much better. But from what I hear of people still in the business, reverse 911 is problematic. This is a slightly different program that you have to call, or you have to contact them and register for this. So I'm just going to go through this a little bit. I'm not going to take the time to bring up the various pages, but as you go through this and answer these queries and establish your account with them, the last thing that you'll come to there is you'll put in your physical address. A map will pop up and it will show where your address is. And if that's accurate, then you don't have to do anything else. But if it's not accurate, then there's a provision, and it took me, I'm pretty inept at this, and I managed to do it, so I'm sure most of you guys will be able to. And if you can't, I'm sure you've got a 12 or 14-year-old grandchild. But it gives you an opportunity, if it's wrong, that you click on the little icon that shows your house and you drag it to where your house actually is. As a part of the feedback in that, it's going to ask you what you want to be notified for, what types of emergencies, and clearly click on anything and everything. And that system is a little more direct. It's not so broad-based as reverse 911, and they have high hopes for it. One of the other things you'll be queried for there is what resources you have and what skills you might have, because it's part of a master disaster plan. And the big component of a disaster plan is foreseeing what you might need and figuring out where it is in the community that you can get to it. Often in major disasters, help from the outside is a long time coming. Like we saw in 2008, we went days and days and days with virtually no help from the outside. So I would encourage you to fill that section out too, and then you'll be in the master database, and if you have a backhoe and they need a backhoe on Signal Ridge, you'll hopefully get a call. And if you have an issue with an encroaching fire, I think you're a little more likely that you're going to get contacted for that. Okay. So because this is a limited amount of time in fire service, we prioritize things, and the highest priority is always life safety. So I'm going to focus on those things that really affect more life safety. I'm willing to stay here and blab for longer than you're going to want to have me stay here and blab. But I'll be happy to stay as long as you want me to, but I want to try to cover these high priority items first. Anybody have any experience with being caught in a wildland fire? And how much notice did you get?
Oh, you were there.
When the fire came?
Yeah, my husband was driving his tractor. We actually started the fire. The squirrels had
So he had early notice.
Yeah. Very early. Very early.
Okay, we're going to diverge right now, because you said that. It was a good thing to say. I have a ride-on mower, and I do a lot of mowing around my house. And anybody that does that kind of thing, they tell you, not to mow when the grass is dead and dry. Well, you have no choice if you're going to be doing clearance, late in the year. You have to do a certain amount of that. And the issue is, lots of fires are started by mowers hitting rocks and setting the grass on fire. So I have one of these. This is a 2.5 gallon pressurized water extinguisher. They're a little pricey. They're probably close to 140, 150 bucks now. You can buy them online. Lots of places you can buy them, but anything in the way of stuff I'm going to talk about as far as fire equipment goes, there's an outfit called L.N. Curtis, Lehman Nancy Curtis. They're based out of Oakland. They do online stuff. You can buy anything there. Their prices are pretty good. You might be able to find stuff better, but this is one thing you can get from them. There are several things about this that I like. If I pull this off, which I won't do it because Lauren will throw me out, but I can hit the front door with this extinguisher for here. And 2.5 gallons doesn't sound like a lot of water, but if you're there in the early stages, it can be all you need. And one of the things that I like about it is you don't have to take it to the fire extinguisher store to get it serviced if you use it. You can just, all you have to do is it's got a little locking ring nut here. First you expel all the pressure that's in it. You take that nut off. You fill it back up with water. Put this back on. You hook it up to your compressor. Charge it up with air until it comes up into the green section here. You're good to go. Takes almost no time at all. Costs nothing. They're great. I have this mounted right behind the seat on my my mower. And if I start a fire, I don't even have to take it off the machine. I can just pull the nozzle out, pull the pin, do that, and away we go.
Is it safe to have something like that in your car as something that you travel around with?
Oh yeah, yeah. It is pressurized, but the danger of explosion in this is pretty low. This has maybe, I'm not sure, maybe 80 pounds. Puts it up in the green, something like that. But we routinely in the fire department carry them on rigs all the time. Never heard of anybody having an issue with them. And mostly what you're going to have is a mess if you puncture it. Okay. So before we get off that subject real quick, how many of you guys have extinguishers in your houses? How many have wood burning fireplaces or stoves? Okay. This is a 3A 40 BC fire extinguisher. People frequently in their houses, they'll have these little teeny extinguishers, and they work, but they don't really pack much bang. This is a really good size to have, and I typically recommend that people have, particularly if you have a wood-burning fuel source in your house, that you have two. You have one in the room where your stove or your fireplace is, and you have one in your kitchen. Those are the two places you're probably most likely to start a fire. By having two, also, it gives you a much better chance of being able to get to it, not having a fire between you and the extinguisher. Just a 1-minute lesson in fire extinguishers. They're all pretty much the same. They've got a little plastic keeper here. The importance of this is to tell you if this has been pulled. And it keeps it from coming out, but its more important function is to know if it has been pulled out. Once these have been cracked, they have a much bigger tendency to leak off than if they haven't. So as long as this stays intact, the likelihood that your gauge is going to bleed off is, pretty low. But to use it, you pull this, and you have to sometimes twist this to break that plastic tie to get it out. Once you pull that out, all you have to do is depress the handle, and it's going to squirt. A thing to remember about fire extinguishers is when you initially hit a fire with a fire extinguisher, you're introducing oxygen, among other things, and you typically will get a flare-up when you first do it. So you don't want to stand right over a fire and put this. You want to stand back for at least 4 or 5 feet, get down so that when the fire flares up, it goes over you and not at you. Pull your hose off, point at the base of the flames, and do it in short bursts. Often, depending on how much fire you have, you may or may not completely extinguish in the first go-round. If you have a fire in your wood stove, very common. How many of you guys have had wood stove fires, chimney fires? Oh, come on. Am I the only one who's had a chimney fire? Very common. These are really effective on chimney fires. You can open the stove or the fireplace. use a little bit to put the fire out in the firebox, and then put a good long blast up the chimney. And then, you know, I advise not doing the whole thing at one shot. Wait and see if that knocks it down pretty good, and then give it, you know, whatever else you need to, if that's an issue. It doesn't generally.
Question. So would it be better to use that than the Chimnex or whatever those things are? Chimnex?
You know, I've never used those, so I can't really.
Yeah, I never had to use one, but.
Yeah. It's a commercial product.
Yeah.
I would imagine they probably work pretty good, or they have a big liability issue there.
Okay.
This is more versatile.
Yes.
You can use it on any type of fire.
Yeah.
The ABC means it's good for ordinary combustibles, it's good for flammable liquids, and it's good for charged electrical circuits.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
minimum of one,
Thank you.
and you know, probably 2 of those in your house. Okay. Okay, I'm going to give you about a really reduced section. Wildland fires are not black and white. It's not the worst fire in the world is here, and you know everything's gone terrible all at once. It's in May, and there's a little fire that's what the fire service calls skunking around, burning low on the ground, virtually no rate of spread. There's that to that, and everything in between. So having some idea of what we call fire behavior, how fire works, is a little bit helpful to you, and it's helpful in assessing your own property to make a decision about, is it time to evacuate? How many of you have definitely made the decision that you're going to evacuate for sure? Okay. How many of you have made the decision that you're going to stay and fight the fire? Okay. CAL FIRE really frowns upon that in these days. I'm not a representative of CAL FIRE. But here's something for you to think about. In a group of this size, usually, you know, I'll get a few people at least who will say, I'm going to stay and fight. Well, number one, everybody's not going to evacuate every time. Everybody's not going to stay and fight every time. Might be a little teeny fire, might be a great big fire. So it's a broad range, and you're going to have to make a decision, is the point of that. So what makes a fire more or less dangerous? The 3 factors that affect what a wildland fire does is first, weather. Is that anything we can do anything about? Not really. That's just a given. It's going to be what it's going to be. Weather in May is one thing. Weather in October is something else again. So when you're making your considerations of how dangerous you think a fire in the neighborhood might be, the first thing you want to consider is what time of year is it, what's the weather doing, and what's it likely going to be doing in the near future. You know what the weather patterns are around your house. You probably have an afternoon breeze that comes up 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And when you have major fires, they're generally weather-driven events and often wind-driven events. And that may not be your normal wind pattern. But weather is a crucial consideration. Has it been hot and dry for 2 months? Is it 110 degrees today? The wind is blowing. The humidity is in single digits. That's the case where we are in extreme danger, and we do not want to be waiting till the last minute to evacuate. So that weather factor is going to be probably the chief thing that's going to help you make that decision. The next factor that affects how a wildland fire burns is topography. Basically, fire burns fast uphill, burns slow downhill, and it burns somewhere in between on flat ground. So how does your house sit relative to the topography? Did you do like so many of us did and have the nice view lot up on the ridge and build it just over the break of the hill where we got the nice view, and we have 2, 3, 4, 5,000 feet below us of fuels? If that's the case, all you have to do is take one of those long kitchen matches, strike it, and hold it level, and watch how it burns. And turn it up, And likely as not, it'll go out when the fire is burning down that match. Then turn it over this way, and you better be ready to let go, because it's going to burn your hand right quick. If your house is above the fuel, with a steep slope coming up at you, that's a high-risk position. House is already built. There's nothing that you can do about topography. There's nothing that you can do about weather. There is something you can do about topography if you are building a house. How you site a house on the lot can have an immense amount to do with whether it survives a wildland fire or not. Most of you, that ship is safe. So our last item that we can consider is fuel. Your house is fuel. Everything around it that burns is fuel. We've been getting some real hard lessons in the fact that houses are fuel in things like the fires in Redwood Valley and the fires particularly in Santa Rosa. One house is burning and setting the next house on fire, setting the next house on fire, setting the next house on fire. For most of us out here, though, we're dealing with vegetation. Can we do anything about that? Yes, that's the answer. Yeah. That's one thing we can do. People get overwhelmed by this because they look at it and they think, oh, I just can't deal with this. And if you look at, if you haven't done anything in 10 years, it's a huge job. But you don't have to do it all in 1 year. Do a little bit and you'll be a little bit more safe this year. Do a little bit more next year. It's never a job that you're done with. There's always, every year, I spend days doing maintenance on the considerations that I have for vegetation clearance around my house. But don't be overwhelmed by the fact that it's a big job. Do a little bit. Start in close and move out.
Quick question. So I clear
when you're talking to old people, you got to yell at them.
Okay. I'm an 11-year-old with gray hair. Anyway, when I clear fields around my house, I do defensible space. I'm worried about the difference as an experienced firefighter. How much of the difference is when you still have the biomass laid down, whacked?
Well, how much difference does that make?
Yeah.
Mowing?
In terms of, I do mowing and whacking.
Okay, well, there's two aspects here. One is ignition. Doesn't really affect ignition at all. There's even an argument that says that mowed grass is more likely to ignite than unmowed grass.
So that's what,
I don't know if that's a good argument, but I've heard that. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it was wrong. But, in the summer conditions, it's just a question of how much it's going to take to ignite that. And, if you get most of the typical ignition sources that we have, people misbehaving with fire is the biggest one by far. So, the ignition factor is maybe a little less important than how well it's going to burn. And when it lays down, we're looking at a couple of things. One is flame length. How tall is it? And two is rate of spread. How fast is it going to move? And those two things tell you a lot about whether it's safe for a professional firefighter to fight a fire or not, and what their likelihood of success is. A kind of a ballpark rule, some people have it bigger, some people have it smaller, but a ballpark rule is that flame length will be 2.5 times what the fuel height is. So if you have 4 foot of grass, what's that going to be, 8, 10 feet of flame? And that's, I've seen every bit of 10 feet of flame coming off 4 feet of grass and more. If you got that same grass mowed down to where it's laying on the ground and it's 2 or 3 inches, that rule is still going to apply, and you're going to be talking flame lengths less than 2 feet. Much easier to handle. The radiant heat coming off of that is going to be far less.
And slower propagation too?
Say again?
Slower propagation too?
Yes, it's going to move slowly. A wind-driven fire is going to move fast under any conditions, but when you have vertically standing fuel, as it ignites, it's burning hot and fast up, and it's rapidly igniting the fuel adjacent to it. And if you've got any wind, it's going to be not only lighting the fuel next to it, it's going to be throwing sparks and doing what we call spot fires. They might be 10 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet. I've seen spot fires myself a half a mile in front of the main fire, and I regularly hear about them in the vicinity of a mile. So when you have a fire that's a long ways away from your house, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need to be watchful.
So if you
Okay.
mowed and so the height is low, but you haven't raked or gotten rid of that, that's still limiting the damage because the height is lower?
Say that again?
Yeah. If you cut the grass, but you haven't raked it or disposed of the cut grass,
You haven't raked it, yeah.
you haven't raked it, then are you still limiting your liability because the height is lower?
It's going to be better because it's shorter fuel. The fuel's still there, so it's going to burn better. Raking it would be better, but mowing it is, you're probably getting better than half the benefit just by mowing it.
It'll break down faster too because it's on the ground and there's just clod or something. Break it back up in hours.
Okay, so I could talk lots more on that, but we've got a limited amount of time here, so if nobody wants to delve into that any further.
I'm just curious, so in terms of, are you going to get into trees?
Say again?
Are you going to get into trees and the branches height, and then what do you do with all that cut stuff? Where
What I
do you
do?
take it?
What
What
I
do
burn?
you do with it?
I burn.
So you.
How many of you guys do burning on your property?
Small fire in there.
Not in the summertime.
Oh, where's your spirit of adventure? You don't want to burn, or
No,
you can't burn.
I do want to burn, but my father won't let me.
Okay.
He's now in his 80s, so I'm trying to take over.
Mendocino
his
County
thing.
Fire Safe Council right now has a chipping program that they do periodically, year by year. So they have a website, you can contact them.
Who is it?
Mendocino County Fire Safe Council.
Thank you.
It's an organization that has contracted over the last several years, but they're still alive, and they have grant money, I understand, this year for chipping. And they will come and chip. And talk to them, because I've run those programs sometimes, and once in a while, they'll even do the clearance. I've gotten grants where, that we'd send in crews and they'd actually clear the property and chip.
Wow.
So I'm not quite sure what they're doing this year.
Is chipping bad this time of year?
Chipping?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do that, and I'm like, I'm not sure that's going to be a good idea.
Anytime you're going to be running equipment in an environment where you might set a fire, I would have water. I'd have, at a minimum, I'd have one of these guys. These are backpack pumps. I saw a whole bunch of you guys raise your hand. So I'm betting lots of you guys burn like I do, where you're way out away from the house and you don't have water. 5 gallons of water in here, hooked up to a back pump. Elaine Curtis sells them. You can find them online. Just keep it as part of your normal equipment when you're doing burning. These are fine also. These are a little more adapted to and specifically designed for vegetation fire. They're simple to use and they work really well.
Colin,
Yeah.
I've been waiting to do my final mow around my house, my backyard, and is there any time I can do that?
Well, here's what I say. Now, this is not Anderson Valley Fire Department speaking, it's not Cal Fire speaking, it's the Colin speaking. You're mowing around your house, so I'm presuming you got a hose and spigots where you can get to the area that you're going to mow. Get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, have a good breakfast, get outside by 6. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the temperature is way down, the humidity is way up, and generally we don't have much wind in the morning. So if you get out there and mow, like between 6 and 8, and you have your water laid out ready to get to it, I don't think that you're going to probably have a problem. And you're mowing an area that you've already mowed.
Right.
Especially so you do it every month. Yeah.
Okay.
But I just mowed last week, and I did the same thing.
That's going on. Thank you.
Is that backpack enough capacity? There's been times when I was using a chainsaw, which I wouldn't use at this time of year, and moss on the side of the tree would go up, and I put it out, I rolled over the flames, got it out. It was around 2008. And
Using one of those back pumps?
Is that enough to put out small?
Oh yeah, yeah. And with that, I could pump and I couldn't hit that door, but I could hit that.
It's a couple gallons.
And I could get 10, 12 feet up a tree pretty reliable. Talking about trees, there's a thing called ladder fuel. You guys all familiar with that term, ladder fuel? What ladder fuel means is you have a tree with say a drone tree, nice straight trunk, got no limbs, for 15 feet up it. Fire burns in, it burns the garden. Take a pine tree, limbs to the ground, pitchy substance, a little bit of dead grass up in it, fire burns in, gets into those limbs, and whoosh, It goes right up that tree. And then you get what's called torching, where the whole tree goes up. Oof. And then that really precipitates the spread of fire. So trees around your house, you know, I say 15 feet. Some of the stuff I have here says 6 feet, but I like 15 feet better. And should be at least 6 feet above your house. I like 15 feet better. You know, you got overhanging limbs, get them way up there above the house, and where those. So if you keep that fuel on the ground down by mowing it, raking it, I burn around my house too, so that there's not much there to burn, and then you limb those trees up, the likelihood that the fire is going to run up the tree is much less. Still potential that it'll do it when you've got high temperatures, low humidity, and wind. But you're much safer to get rid of those ladder fuels, and you know, you want to do that, you know, a minimum of 30 feet out from your house. I'm more like 100 feet out from my house, and my house is on flat ground. You had a question?
No.
What
I
about-
was thinking about the amount of work that is where I live.
How much work is that?
No, I'm thinking about the amount of work that would be to get to that, where I live.
Staggering.
Yeah,
we've
staggering.
We've done like 60
Yeah.
acres of our property, and I'd love to continue, because if it ladders up past that, it doesn't matter the fact that I've done 60 acres. If it's already in the canopy, which is super steep below me, if it's
Yeah.
already in the canopy, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter that I've de-laddered my entire 16 acres if it's already in that canopy. I would like to keep going more.
Yeah.
I'd like to just keep, but then it's not off property, so you're talking.
Well, without looking at your house, there, you know, I couldn't really say, but people have houses that are indefensible. I mean, that happens. And if you got one of those houses, you want to be one of those early evacuation people. And you want to have good fire insurance, you know, maybe a little better than the average person does. You want to, I'm going to talk a little bit about go boxes here. And, you know, you want to plan for your house burn.
Colin, what about small trees that are starting to grow? Unfortunately, they're under that 6 and 10
Well,
foot canopy. Do we
I live a third of the way. I'd say a third of the height of the tree, pick the limbs off it. Next year, take it up to a third of the height of the tree again. Next year, take it up to a third of the height of the tree again. When you get up to 15 feet, quit.
Okay.
Most any tree will tolerate taking a third of the foliage off of it.
Yeah, because I'm talking trees that are only this big
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, but most any of them will. I used to trim trees for a living. That's kind of a standard rule. If you didn't want to endanger the health of the tree, don't take more than a third of the foliage off of any one. Alrighty. Okay, so we diverged a little bit there. Okay, let's talk. Okay, just because I turned it here, we're going to talk about evacuations. But before we talk about that, I'm going to talk about go boxes. Anybody knows? Are you guys familiar with that concept? How many of you have?
You like a go bag? Yeah.
Okay. Cindy, what do you have in yours?
I have 3 days of medication. I have snacks, water, a change of underwear. I have walkable shoes. They're not in the bag, but I'm not always wearing shoes. I can walk in any distance. I used to have, it doesn't matter. I used to have a blanket, you know, one of those aluminum type.
Okay, those kind of things that you're talking about, food, water, blankets, shoes. Personally, if I were in Florida, I would probably worry about this. Here, I'm not going to worry about it. If I get burned out, I'm not going to be camping out. I'm going to be going to my kid's house. I'm going to be going to my, somebody else's house. I'm going to go rent a motel. I'm going to take my little debit card and I'm going to charge off. So those kind of things, what we're looking at here, there is an earthquake risk here. And in a major earthquake, that's where you get a regional problem where I can't go to my kid's house because his house is on the ground too. But in wildland fires, even, and we're talking the biggest wildland fire in the history of California now, and it's 300,000 acres. I mean, small, relatively small area, and usually in a rural area. Although we are now learning the lesson that the days where wildland fires were confined to the wildland is over. They're burning into Redding, California. They're burning into Santa Rosa. They burn through Redwood Valley. They burn through a portion of Potter Valley. So go boxes, I got a publication here that I did not print for everybody because it was too long. But this is, I would strongly recommend, you know, particularly since you guys are working with other seniors, that you download this and take a look at it. It's How to Prepare for Wildland Fire. It's a FEMA publication, and if you Google how to prepare for wildland fire, it's a FEMA publication, so it's national. It's not calibrated strictly to California, so some of it's a little bit on the irrelevant side, but it's basically pretty darn good document. And you know, it'll maybe have you thinking about some things you hadn't been thinking about. So going back to those go boxes there. So what I was recommending, and this was just my own little brilliant idea, was having 2 go boxes. Having one that's just packed and stays packed all the time, because there's, you know, a lot of stuff that'd be, you know, like your insurance policies, your bank account information. I would recommend that on a spreadsheet, put all of your bank accounts, all of your retirement accounts, numbers, you know, maybe, you know, have some way of recovering passwords if that's an issue. And have all of that, and that should be something that's in that go box. Copies of birth certificates, marriage licenses, passports, those things are all, and that's a good place to store your passport, for one thing. So you don't have to think about that one. All you have to do is grab it, throw it in the rig, and it goes with you.
Well, Cynthia said the meds, I think that's pretty important.
Say that again?
The medications are important, right?
The medications wouldn't be in that box. That's why I say have 2. Do you want your medications in a go box that's in the back of your closet? Or do you got them out on the counter? The second box is for those things that you're not going to want to keep stored away in the back of the closet that you're going to want to just grab. You probably got medications for sure. That, you know, my second box is this big by this big plastic tub. I can just go by it. Rake up. In my first box, I'm going to have a list of my medications, my doctor's name, all of that stuff, so that I can get that prescription redone. But the prescription itself is going to go in that second box. It's going to be the last thing I do on the way out the door.
What about a first aid kit? Would that go in the first box or the second box?
Again, having some first aid kit at your house is, you know, always a good idea. I'm really, I don't care for commercial first aid kits very much. They tend to stuff them with a bunch of fluff that you don't use, and they charge a lot of money for them. I like going down the counter in the pharmacy and saying, oh, 4x4 bandages, sterile 4x4 bandages and paper things. You know, having dealt with a lot of patients, I use those a handful at a time. You know, you do a lot with 4x4 bandages, roller gauze bandages, to where you can put them on with those kind of things. This is in a medical class, so I won't go into it. But that's what I do, is I go down that, you know, the aisle in the pharmacy and pick up that stuff that I actually think I'll use and not be paying, you know, $35 for a bunch of stuff that I'm probably not going to use. And again, in the scenario that we're talking about, leaving the earthquake thing out of it, we're talking a relatively confined disaster that you're going to go 20 miles and you're going to be out of it, you're going to pull out your debit card, you're going to buy whatever you need. So I wouldn't get too carried away with, you know, having my camping equipment to cover me and food and supplies and everything for weeks or months that I plan to take with me, and just buy it. Okay, here's an important one. How many of you guys have videoed your possessions in your houses? Okay, this is a really good one. Your insurance, if you do lose your house, you're going to have your contents insurance, and they may or may not take your word for the fact that you have a, you know, $6,000 entertainment center there. And you won't remember everything that you've got, you know, but if you'll just go into every room, take your, you know, your little camera and do a slow pan around the room, and things like, you know, if you've got expensive jewelry, I take pictures of that. Got to prove that you had it. And also your outbuildings. I've got extensive tools, and I've got more money wrapped up in tools than I do in jewelry, that's for sure. So, you know, anything that's pricey at all, and instead of trying to remember it, just walk around and video everything. You know, it might take you 2 or 3 hours if you do all your outbuildings, you know, the whole shebang. Put it on a flash bag, you know, a flash drive, CD, you know, whatever, and that stays in your permanent box, and you update it periodically. I would strongly recommend that you, while you're going through this process and when you're helping other people go through this process, that you've got your packed box, your number 1 box. You don't need to remember what's in that. It's all this all the time. Your number 2 box is an empty box, and believe me, when the fire's coming, you're not going to be thinking real clearly. So make a list. Walk around the house, make a list of what things you want to gather in that. Tape it to the top of the box, and then you'll be able to just go down as a checklist and fill that second box. Okay, anybody got any thoughts on that, the stuff they've done, or questions about it? Let's talk about evacuation.
Colin?
Yeah.
A friend of mine whose house burned down, he said he had a plan of he had 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute, and 20-minute. So he literally said, if they tell me I have to leave in 20 minutes, here's what I'm going to do. If I only have 10 minutes, and he had just organized it. And I thought, oh, it's a little over the top. When his house burned down, he had 25 minutes, and he had everything he needed out and into his car. And I just thought, and now it wasn't on the, it was on the refrigerator, not on the top of the box. I thought it was
not a bad idea. I mean, he's thought about all those things. Yeah. But one of the rules that I like to keep in regards to emergencies is keep it simple. That's a politically correct version. The other version is keep it simple, stupid. Most of us have been involved in something that was a really frightening situation. You literally get tunnel vision. Your peripheral vision, when you're really up against it, your peripheral vision shuts down, and your brain does not think like it's thinking now. It doesn't do it. What you're talking about there, Philip, is trigger points, and I think that is a good recommendation. There, whenever I was, when I was in those situations, particularly when I was doing structure protection, I sit down with my crew or my strike team, and we talk about what the trigger points are. Okay, because when you're doing structure protection, sometimes you're racing in there and you barely get there. You get there at the same time the fire does, but much more often you're getting there hours, sometimes days before the fire does. So you take a look around, you consider all those things we know about fire, and you establish trigger points. When the fire's doing that, I'm going to do this. When the fire gets to there, I'm going to do this. So those things really do come in handy with trigger points. And you also, when you're talking about evacuations, you have lots of people that are in the situation Donna's in, where she has one escape route. If that fire has her escape route blocked, as it well might, she doesn't have another alternative. How many of you guys are in that situation? Okay. So what is your alternative if you can't evacuate? You're going to stay there. That's called sheltering in place, and it's one of the really big, strong recommendations for doing good vegetation management around your place. So before we talk about how you're going to evacuate, I always thought, when you've got very few people in this group said, I'm going to stay and fight. Well, you might be staying, you might not be fighting, but you might be staying and you might not have a choice about that. So it's good to give yourself some tools to work with. And that's a longer conversation. We've got time to work with now. I've got a whole presentation on developing water for fire protection. And most of it is in this pamphlet. which I brought enough copies for most of you. And if you don't get a chance to get one, they've got them at the fire department. This tells you, I don't say it tells you everything you need to know about developing water for fire protection, but it pretty much will cover it. So if you're going to be stuck there, what you want is to assess on your property. On my property, I have a great vegetation clearance around it. I have a green lawn in front of it. On the other side of the green lawn, I have a swimming pool. On the other side of the swimming pool, I have good vegetation clearance for 60, 75 feet out. So I got and I have 3 fire hydrants around my house that are fed by gravity feed water, so when the power goes out, my fire hydrants are going to work just fine. I have a wealth of choices there. And if you're planning to stay, which almost nobody here was, the question you have to ask yourself is, if everything around me burns down all at one time, can I live through it and not be seriously hurt? I can do that. I can be on my green lawn and I got 100 feet around me in all directions, and if push comes to shove, I can get in the swimming pool, put a towel over my head, and I'm going to be able to survive a really bad fire. Fires, when they move, particularly bad fires, they tend to move rapidly. And we tend to think of, well, the fire is going on for days and days and days. Well, the fire is going on for days and days and days, but it's going on in all different places. It's not going on in one place for days and days and days. In most cases, if you're in a south-facing slope where you have the lighter fuels, the fire doesn't go on for hours. The fire goes on for minutes and sometimes seconds. If it's a wind-driven fire moving up a grassy slope, it is going to race through and it's going to be there and gone in less than a minute. If you are in the situation this gentleman was describing, where he's in a fairly heavy wooded area, those are heavier fuels, they take a lot longer, they're harder to ignite, but once they ignite, they take a lot longer to burn. And remember that figure, 2.5 times the height of the fuel, potentially your flame length. So what you want to be looking at is, if I get trapped here, what am I going to do? What are my options? The first thing we train our firefighters to do is stay with the engine. You don't have an engine, but you've got a car. It's metal. It's going to resist ember intrusion. It will burn, but it takes time for it to ignite and burn. So we tell our firefighters, get in the engine, shelter in the engine till you can't stand it anymore, and then you got to go outside. But depending on where you have positioned yourself, what the fuel is around you, if you can stay in that car for 3 or 4 minutes as the flaming front moves through, good chance you're going to be able to step out, and you may have some problems, but it's probably not going to die. Your house is probably the best shelter-in-place unit that you have. Depends on what it's built out of, depends on what the fuel is around it. But even a bad house, a house that's all wood frame construction, got a shingle roof, got everything wrong with it. When that house ignites from the outside, the whole house doesn't go and burn up. It takes it a while to ignite for the fire to move from the outside to the inside and move through the house. In all likelihood, if you can stay in that house for 10 or 15 minutes while it's burning, at the end of that time, you're going to be able to step out, into your secondary shelter area. In my case, got a green lawn and a swimming pool out there. You're going to be able to shelter that. So you want to have that plan. Even if you're telling yourself you're going to evacuate. People that die in fires sometimes wake up to find the house on fire. They wake up to find that everything around them is on fire, their car is on fire. People that get killed are very often evacuating late. It's the worst time to be out in the fire as the flaming front is moving through. So you want to consider that, depending on, what your house is built out of, what kind of vegetation clearance you've done around it, what the building materials are, and you may not have a choice, and don't panic and run down the driveway where you've got huge flames on both sides of the driveway when you could have stayed in the house and lived. Okay, so that's a decision for everybody to make.
Can I ask you a question about your hydrants? So I did the same thing in gravity feed on mine. You're a trained firefighter. Would I be using that to soak down property? How much is that going to retard thing?
Generally speaking, how much water supply do you have?
5,000 gallons.
Okay, I got 6, so very simple. You can afford to do a little of that, but generally speaking, we recommend against pre-wetting in advance of a fire. How long is going to be, here's a mistake people make. They have the roof sprinklers, which I have roof sprinklers on my house, highly recommend them. If I turn my roof sprinklers on and then evacuate, 2 days later, the fire gets to my house. I don't have any water left. And I've got my fire hydrants out where the fire department's going to see them. I got them painted red, and they're not going to do any good if I don't have any water behind it. So pre-wetting, when you know the fire is going to be there very shortly, and particularly you didn't do your spring maintenance and you still got stuff up on your roof that's easily ignitable, and that might be worth a little blast of water. Because your water supply is gravity feed, so okay. When you use that gravity feed hydrant, and you have fire hose there to go with it and nozzles?
I don't everywhere. That's the other thing.
They'll encourage. You can also, it'll be a little pricier, but I like Wyatt Irrigation over in Ukiah. Haven't dealt with them in years, but I think they're still pretty good. The thing I like about Wyatt is I can go there and do one-stop shopping. I can get every fitting I want. I can get everything, and I can do it there at one time. They're not, some stuff, they're not the cheapest source, but you can almost surely get it. And I believe they have fire hose there too. And all I have is I have that inexpensive rack hose, which fire departments really look down their nose on. Is, one thing you want to make sure of in any hose that you get, do not get cotton hose. Get synthetic hose. Cotton hose does not store well when it gets wet or moldy. It's very susceptible to mildew and mold. And that's why I like this cheap nylon. It's called rack hose. It's what you see in buildings where they'll have it. They'll have the little door that opens up and the thing that swings out. It's got the little. It's real light hose. It's easily damaged, but I've had mine in place now for 14 years, I guess, and it still looks like it did when I put it in the boxes. And I just use those little cheap plastic nozzles. Got 3 of those cut around, and then I built little cabinets. You'll see them in those that water supply pamphlet. I just built little panels in right next to my fire hydrant. I got 100 feet of hose and a nozzle right in there, and then I painted the box red. You can see that.
So Colin, did you say you do not recommend the roof sprinklers?
Oh no, I do. I have.
Yeah.
And what I got it's a little bit on the pricey side, but they make these tripods with rainbirds on top of them, and then you can, because that fits on the peak of your roof real handy, and it's pretty stable. And as part of my spring chores, every year in the fall I take them down because it's not good for the hose to lay on the roof. And I ran PVC up to my roof, and I put 2 fittings up there. And I've got two rainbirds on these tripods up there that hit about 20 feet outside the perimeter of my house. I've got a redwood deck, and that all gets wetted down, and everything around the house gets wetted down. For those, it takes them maybe 15 or 20 minutes to really get things wet, because it's
But they don't work if your power goes out, correct?
gravity feed water.
How much pressure on that gravity?
I wish I had more, but what I have at the house is about 38 pounds.
We have gravity, but it's like a lousy 10 psi.
Okay, here's what you do.
Got a 2-inch supply line, but it's long. It's off the mountain.
So you got a 2-inch line to a tank, PVC line.
Yeah, it's buried.
Buried.
Yeah.
Okay.
All over the top. But it's. I've noticed when I have a little Honda fire pump.
Right there, same pump probably.
Yeah.
When you hook up that pump, does that work? Can you draw suction through that line?
I can. It'll sputter now and then because there's an air pocket in the line or something. Because the line is like this over the hill. But I can't have any other faucet open,
Because it'll dry or
it'll start sucking air.
Right, right.
But if all that is okay, yeah, I can put water over the top of my house with that
Okay.
thing.
Well, and how far did you have to run to do that? How far is it from your tanks to the house?
Well, the tanks are, I don't know, almost half a mile away. Maybe not quite, but I don't have to go to the tanks because it's our.
So the other thing you can think about doing then.
I have what I'm saying. I have hydrants a little bit close to every structure.
Well, that's all great, but if you can't produce, you need to be able to produce 40 or 50 pounds of pressure coming out the end of that pump, and that pump will continue to run. The whole idea behind having those hydrants and a water supply like that, a garden hose doesn't put out enough water to get over what we call the thermal curve when you've got a significant fire coming at you. You're standing there with your garden hose, and it's just not cutting. You've got a much better chance. I laid 2-inch line from my tanks to my house. My tanks are, I forget what they are, about 80 feet above the house. So I got about 34, 38 pounds, depends on where you are in elevation to the house. And the test is that I like, a good practical test, is you hook up your fire hose to your hydrant or your pump. Can I squirt it over the house? If you can do that, you got something there you can work with. But if you can't do that, then you might want to consider what anybody can do in any situation is buy yourself a 3,000-gallon plastic tank, put it near your house, put the fittings on it so you can hook your pump directly up to that, and then away you go. Then you got the full value of the pump. And if you can't save your house with 2,500 gallons of water, you shouldn't be there. We go there with 500 gallons of water. We save 100 for us. That's 400 gallons of water, and we save lots of houses like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say, but we need to finish in about 10 minutes. So if you can go maybe 5 more minutes, and then we do some last questions. Thank you.
Okay, so. So let's close with evacuation routes 2, if you can get them. And they should, not something you think you can do, but something you're pretty sure you can do. And that needs to be disseminated to everybody in the household. You need to make sure that, sometimes people will say, okay, I can go over my neighbor's ranch. Well, if I'm in my Prius, maybe I can't go over my neighbor's ranch. So, a practical evacuation route, preferably 2, that doesn't have a locked gate on it that you can't get through. Then, your decision on when to evacuate, we talked about that some. Maybe you're going to get a sheriff's rig coming into your driveway saying evacuate. Maybe you're going to get a reverse 911 call. Maybe you're going to register this thing like we talked about. And maybe, you're going to see the smoke. My advice is don't depend on the system. Don't depend on being alerted. Don't depend on a fire truck coming there. Have your plan so that you are independent of anybody coming to do anything for you.
There's some talk of a signal being put in the valley.
I can go up where I can see it. I can't hear you, but I can't see it.
There's some talk of there being not a bell, but like a siren or something being put in the valley.
An alert system?
An alert system siren.
I haven't heard of that generally speaking. I have recommended that. I have friends, I don't know if anybody knows people up in the old Poma Sierra, the last living commune in, I think, Northern California. They have a bunch of what they call, for the county's purposes, detached bedrooms. What they actually have is 7 houses up there. And so they've got 2 situations there. They're all older people now, too. And this may apply to, those air horns, you get a good one, and you can hear those for a long ways off, even inside of the house. The other situation is, I've got an emergency, and I can't get out, and I need help. So my recommendation to them was everybody gets an air horn, and you have 2 codes on it. One code is 5 continuous beep, 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 and that's going to mean there's fire on the property, heads up. The other code is, I'm having an emergency and I need you come to me, and that's going to be beep, beep, whatever works for you. But, and there are a lot of places and people where you have older people living in semi-isolation, like Joni Clark. You know, Joni could go down in her house and Barbara never know it until, you know, they found the body 3 or 4 days later. So anybody that's in that kind of a situation where they may need to summon help and might not be able to deal with the phone, those are, or even if they can deal with the phone, it's a lot faster to hit the air horn. And away you go. Okay.
Where would you get one of those?
I have, thank you so much for this presentation, just amazingly valuable information. I've been videoing, I'm going to put it up on a Facebook Valley post.
Well, when you put it up there, tell them I got this is the short version.
Okay.
I can go on forever.
But
you know, in 3 or 4 hours, I can do a full presentation, including, you know, evaluation of local sites.
Well, in the interest of informing our neighbors, we live up on Mountain View, and I would love to have you come and do something for our Mountain View neighbors. Maybe we can do something just by the neighbor, you know, by the neighborhood. This is a bit of a delicate question. What should we do? Is there anything that we can do to compel neighbors around us who we think may not be implementing fire safe measures? Maybe they're not clearing, or maybe they're not. Is there anything?
You haven't got a legal leg to stand on to force them to do anything.
Nothing.
So my strong advice is bake them an apple pie and beg for mercy. You know,
It's a situation where it affects us more than them, because like, oh, well, they have, the fires burn up, well, we're up. You know?
I would advise you to, I don't know if you're on these kind of, you know, if you can do this, but invite them over for dinner and, you know, tell them what the issue is and, you know, say, this is what we'd like to do. What would you be willing to have us do? You know, is this too much? Come, you know, under that theory of, if I do a little bit, I'm a little bit more safe than I used to be.
Yeah.
I'm willing
You know Ron Jester up on Mountain View Road? Ron Jester?
Yeah.
You ever go to his place? He's done a wonderful job there. He has really at-risk, you know.
He's been to our house too, and he saw the work that we were doing. He's one of our neighbors, and we have a few below us, around us, above us, that we feel like could put a little more attention. We don't want to be busybodies.
Is that a subdivision, or are those all just strictly individual parcels?
Individual parcels.
Is common access road?
One shared driveway.
For some, but others it's just a long mountain view.
Well, if you have interest in your neighbors, you know, and if you can get 6 or 8 of them there, and you'd like me to come and do an assessment of your
if you have a
site
card
there.
or anything like that for
Yeah.
us.
I don't want to come across as the new guy on the mountain looking over your fence. I don't like what I see, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you know what,
Yeah,
Angel was
good.
talking about setting up a fire safe,
Neighborhood.
a neighborhood watch on Mountain View, so.
I think if you offer to pay for it, that'll go a long way. You can work on my place if you want.
Colin, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. And if you can pay attention to Stephanie, she's got some
And I've got
questions.
a quick question. As we try to spread the word about some of these different events, just show of hands, how many of you heard about this event from an email that was sent to you? 5. Okay. How many heard it on the radio? Okay. 2.
Poster in the post office.
How many saw the poster, flyer? Post office. And what did I miss that other people saw? Wait a minute. What is it? Facebook? Valley Hub? Yeah?
Boon swap.
Pardon?
Boon swap.
Boon swap. Anyone on the calendar? See it on the calendar?
Yes.
All right, anything I missed?
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth? Yes.
From Donna's.
All right, thank you everyone so much for coming.
What is
I don't know if that changed.
Oh, and just to help us out,